what we need to do now is to think about equilibrium, combining the goods market and the money market or financial market. We have the IS representing equilibrium in, so every point on that curve, on the IS curve, represents equilibrium in the goods market, and LM, every point on that curve, the LM curve, represents equilibrium in financial markets. Now bringing these two together, when we bring these both together, the IS relation depends on disposable income, and I, which depends on Y and I, so the interest rate, plus G we continue to have or to consider or treat G, government spending, as an exogenous variable. On the other side, our LM curve is horizontal because central banks choose the interest rate, so it's kind of given by the central bank. So that's why you see I here equal I bar, because this is something, or this is some level of the interest rate that is given by the central bank. So the central bank change it for any level of Y, so and then they can change it. So increase it or decrease it, and that's what they target, and then, or that's what they choose first, and then based on that they adjust money supply to achieve that level of interest rate. So the IS and LM relation together, these two together, determine the output level. So the equilibrium in both markets simultaneously. So you have both markets cleared when you have the interaction between both, which will give us, as you might expect, the intersection point between both curves. You need to understand this well. So every point or any point on the downward sloping IS curve correspond to equilibrium in the goods market. Any point on the LM, which in our case now is horizontal, and I show you the traditional way of thinking about LM, which is upward sloping curve. But if we take into consideration the way that modern central banks work, then we would probably have it horizontal line, the LM curve. But any point in that curve still, so regardless of whether it is horizontal or upward sloping, any point in that curve correspond to an equilibrium or equilibrium in financial markets. As we said, so the interaction between both, that will give us equilibrium in both markets, financial markets and goods markets. So the goods market and financial market. So basically what we do here, we just bring both together. The IS, which we know it's downward sloping curve, which represents equilibrium in the goods market, and LM, which represent equilibrium in financial markets. And this point here, the intersection point, basically this is the equilibrium in both markets simultaneously, because this point A, it lies on the IS, and at the same time it lies on the LM. This is the only point where both markets are clear. So this is the only point where both markets are equilibrium. And that gives us the associated output level or income level. So this is the equilibrium level of outputs, and also the equilibrium interest rate. This is how equilibrium in both markets. So all what we did is just we brought these together in one graph, and this is basically the IS-LM model. So we learn how to drive the IS curve, we learn how to drive the LM curve, and now we can have a tool to analyze or to do some policy analysis. What would happen if there's a policy change? Fiscal policy, basically, if the policy is to decrease G minus T, so G here is government spending, T is taxes. So if you have a fiscal contraction means, or a contractionary policy, that means G minus T should decrease, or that's called fiscal consolidation as well. If you increase G minus T, that means there's a fiscal expansion. So the government spending is more than, or increasing the government spending minus taxes, so that means more an expansionary policy. You increase money supply, that means expansionary monetary policy. You decrease money supply, that's contractionary policy or monetary tightening, which we'll look at it now. Now let's see how have a situation or a scenario where there's a change in fiscal policy. So first ask yourself, does the policy change affect IS or LM? Think about whether it's going to happen in the goods market or in the financial market. Then you need to think about what does this mean to equilibrium, output and interest rates. And then you need just to describe the effect in words. So these are the kind of steps in your mind just to think about, okay, there's a change in government spending. Where the effect, or how this, which part of this ISLM model will be affected by this? Oh, we know the government spending is part of aggregate demand, and aggregate demand determines equilibrium in the goods market, and that means the effect should go through the IS curve, and so on. So that's just a way of thinking how you should analyze or think about these policy changes. What we have here is an increase in taxes. That effect should go through the effect of taxes on aggregate demand. That means the effect should go through the effect on, or should go through the change or shift in the IS curve, because this IS curve represents equilibrium in the goods market. So now the question I want to know, okay, which way is it going to shift, right or left, the IS curve now? Then it depends on how the effect of that policy change on aggregate demand. See the sequence? So I thought first, okay, there's a change in taxes, where that should go, where that effect should go through the aggregate demand, because taxes is part of or affect aggregate demand. So now I need to know which direction the shift should be. Higher taxes mean it's lower aggregate demand, and we said before the general rule is anything that lowers aggregate demand should shift the IS to the left. We have, this is the first IS curve with a first equilibrium point A, and this is associated with this level of I, interest rate, and this level of output. Now what happened is increase in taxes lowered the aggregate demand curve, and that will shift the IS curve to the left. And the result here is we still have the same interest rate, but we have a lower level of output, which is Y prime. So this is the effect of the policy change. You need to think about it this way. Which side will be affected by this policy change? You should understand what determines or the equilibrium in both markets. So if there's something to do with aggregate demand, so that means the effect will go through the goods market, which means it will shift the IS curve. If the change or the policy change affect the money side or the financial market or money markets, then that means the effect should go through the LM curve, because that's what represents financial markets. So this is a very simple example. So if there was an increase in government spending, how this is going to affect the equilibrium? So this is just another case now. We have an increase in government spending. So first you need to ask yourself where this effect should go. Should go through the goods market or financial markets? Goods market. So now I want to know how this is going to affect the aggregate demand. Is it going to raise the aggregate demand or lower the aggregate demand? Having a higher level of government spending. So that should raise the aggregate demand. So anything raises the aggregate demand should shift the IS curve to the right. So that's very clear now. So how fiscal policy affects equilibrium. If the central bank choose to lower the interest rate, they need to increase money supply. Okay, so they go to the bonds market, they go as buyer. So they buy bonds, and that will increase money supply. And that is called monetary expansion. If we have a monetary contraction, that means if the central bank choose to increase the interest rate, so that means they need to decrease money supply. And to decrease money supply, they need to go to the bonds market, they need to sell bonds. And in that case, it's called monetary contraction or monetary tightening. How is this going to affect our equilibrium? What should we think about first? Which side will be affected by this change? Is it going to be the goods market or the money market? And then that will tell you which curve will be affected mainly by this change. Is it IS or LM? In this case, let's say there's a decrease in interest rate. A decrease in interest rate means this is a monetary expansion, meaning that to decrease the interest rate, that means the central bank should increase money supply, and to increase money supply, they buy bonds. So they enter the bonds market as a buyer, and again, this is part of the open market operations. But how this is going to affect our equilibrium is lowering the interest rate. So given that we have this horizontal LM curve, so lowering interest rate basically just mean you move this or shift this LM curve downward. The first point, the first equilibrium point with A at the higher level of interest rate, I bar, and again, bar here means that's what explains the horizontal shape of that LM curve, because it's given by the central bank. Changing that by the central bank to a lower interest rate, which is I bar prime here. This means shift the ILM downward, and that means we move from equilibrium point here A to A prime, which means how this is going to affect interest rate and output. Obviously, interest rate is by, that's the policy change has dropped, but also this has some impact on output, which here means we move from Y to Y prime, which means that output has increased as a result of monetary expansion. So this is an expansionary policy, monetary policy, which results in increasing the output, the equilibrium output from Y to Y prime. The main message is how equilibrium is determined in both markets, the goods market and financial markets simultaneously. The IS and LM model is very convenient and very simple way to think about it, and most importantly, to understand the effective policy changes or policy shifts using this model.